Garter stitch has a lot to recommend it. It's thick, warm, and completely non-rolling. And in hand knitting, it's easy as pie. You simply knit every row, no purling. On a knitting machine, one can use a garter bar. This Chris Crafter is one of my favorite styles, but there are others and they all work well. However, you may not have one for every machine. They're not made for absolutely every gauge. And they're a fairly expensive accessory, so you may not have budgeted for yours yet. Here's something you can do in that case. Any plain old knitting needle that fits into the stitches in question, so it'll be different size needles for different gauges of machine, will do the job. My preference is circular knitting needles because the short head gives it more manipulability, but you still have a lot of place to put stitches if you need to. I saved this broken one for the purpose. One of the needles broke off of the receiver, but it's still useful for making garter stitch, and that way I can use the nice smooth bamboo to lift up the stitches. Let me show you how it works. In order to get the garter stitch effect, we need to turn the fabric just as we would if we were hand knitting. So we'll knit a row, lift all of the stitches in order, one at a time, onto the knitting needle. Now we must unthread the carriage and move it to the other side because that's where the working yarn will be and we need it to be continuous. So move the carriage across, turn the knitting. Now the working yarn is in a position to be threaded back into the carriage and seat each stitch in order on a needle. Make sure you didn't somehow get the wrong needle count moving forward and everybody gets a place to sit. Then thread the carriage and knit across again. Knitting single garter stitch, which is turning every row, we will always knit from one side because that would be the net result of knitting a row, turning, and getting set up to knit the next row. So we knit again from left to right, and then we're going to repeat the whole process for as many rows as we need to. As I do these rows super quickly, note that I am showing you more than one way to get the stitches off of the machine needles. You can either lift up on the knitting itself and give it a sharp pull, and usually the latches will just release it into your hand, or you can push the needles all the way forward and then all the way back, and the knitting will come off. One other thing to take note of, and one time in this video you'll see me mess it up, and one reason I like the bamboo needle is that you don't really want to split the stitches, and it's kind of easy to do as you're lifting them off. And I did it only one time. The rounded tip on a bamboo needle makes it easier to avoid doing that. If you see that you've done it, you can correct it while you are rehanging, and I did that on the one occasion that I had a problem. An option that you may want to consider if you're doing a machine knitting project that requires garter stitch is double garter stitch, which I am doing now in front of your eyes. This swatch is single garter stitch on the left, as I first demonstrated, double garter stitch on the right, as I am showing you now. It has a similar character in that it is deeply textured and non-roll. The stripes are much more obvious, and the real advantage to machine knitters is that it is a little bit less laborious. You get exactly half the times that you must turn the work as before. But one thing to keep in mind is the process is almost identical, but because we knit 2 rows, then turn it, we will be swapping sides with the carriage. We won't always knit from one side, left or right. We will knit 2 rows beginning on the left, flip the work, move the carriage over, knit 2 rows beginning on the right. Otherwise, it's identical. And because garter stitch on the knitting machine is a little bit laborious and time-consuming, you can get a similar effect, as in it's non-rolling, and it adds some weight to a cuff or a hem, by doing double garter stitch. One thing about garter stitch not to love is that the edge has a kind of a bumpy look. It's not very cosmetically lovely. In hand knitting, we can make it so. Recently, friends and I were discussing this on one of the knitting groups that I participate in, and I figured out a way to make this beautiful chain-stitched edge in hand knitting. There's a video on that, and I will put a link in the program notes because I know some of you hand knit as well. So it would be really nice to be able to get this pretty edge on machine knitting, wouldn't it? I've been working on that, and I have come up with about 3 ways to do it. The first of them is well developed and ready for prime time. The others are in progress. So I will show you how to get this one in the next video. By the way, this is going to be part of an entire playlist on garter stitch techniques for machine knitters. Some of them are existing videos, which I will put into the playlist, and some of them are brand new as I fiddle around and find techniques we can all use and enjoy. Garter stitch may be a little bit labor intense for machine knitters, but sometimes it is worth doing a little bit for effect, especially if you don't have a ribber.